For centuries, the word harem has stirred whispers of mystery. Behind the high walls of the Sultan's palace, a world existed that few outsiders ever saw, a world hidden behind veils and shadows, spoken of in rumors and half-forgotten stories. To the people of the empire, the harem was both a symbol of ultimate power and a place of unspoken secrets. To foreign travelers, it was the heart of Oriental fascination, imagined as a labyrinth of desire, jealousy, and political intrigue. But the truth was far more complex. The harem was not merely a chamber of silken song, nor a stage for pleasure alone. It was a kingdom within a kingdom, where women, eunuchs, and advisors shaped the fate of empires. It was a place where silence carried the weight of politics, where glances were as sharp as blades, and where the Sultan himself ruled not only with armies and decrees, but through the delicate web of those closest to him. The walls of the harem stood high, shutting out the noise of the city, the cries of merchants, the dust of the markets. Inside, time seemed to move differently, measured not by the sun, but by the rhythm of rituals, the rustle of silk, and the quiet steps of those who lived in service to desire and ambition. For the people outside, the harem was a myth, a forbidden paradise, a place where the Sultan's pleasures knew no bounds. For those within, it was both a sanctuary and a prison. Tonight, we will step quietly beyond those walls. We will walk the corridors lined with marble, pass beneath arches that filtered the light into soft golden pools, and listen to the whispers that history tried to conceal. This is not the story of fantasy, nor the dream of travelers who wrote what they imagined. This is the story of power, secrecy, and the forbidden truths hidden behind the Sultan's palace walls. Welcome to Scroll Historian. Here we unroll the forgotten pages of the past, stories of power, fear, and silence that history tried to hide. If you enjoy journeys into these hidden chapters, I invite you to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps keep history alive and ensures these stories reach others who seek to understand the shadows of the past. Now, let us begin. The walls of silence. The harem did not announce itself with grandeur. Unlike the towering mosques or the bustling courtyards of the Sultan's palace, its presence was veiled, hidden behind high stone walls and guarded gates. To walk near it was to feel both curiosity and unease, for no ordinary subject could cross its threshold. The silence around it spoke louder than any proclamation. The walls themselves seemed to breathe secrecy. They rose high, smooth and pale, punctuated only by narrow windows that revealed nothing of the world within. From the outside there was no music, no laughter, no hint of the silks and perfumes said to lie beyond. Only guards at the entrance, stern, expressionless, chosen for their loyalty, reminded passers-by that this was no ordinary dwelling, but the most private heart of the Sultan's empire. Rumors clung to those walls like ivy. In the markets of Constantinople, merchants and travelers whispered tales of what might be hidden within. Some spoke of endless halls filled with golden couches and fountains that spilled with rosewater. Others imagined women of every land, Persian, Greek, Circassian, Egyptian, chosen for beauty and trained to captivate. Still others believed that the harem was not only a place of pleasure, but of power, where decisions whispered in candlelight would ripple across the empire's provinces. Yet, for all the speculation, the truth remained sealed away. Even the most privileged viziers could not pass freely. Foreign ambassadors, who recorded every detail of their visits to the Sultan's court, admitted that the harem was a world beyond their reach. It existed like a shadow within the palace, known but never seen, feared yet endlessly imagined. To the people outside, the walls became a canvas for their imagination, painted with fantasies, scandals, and fears. But for those inside, they were barriers of another kind. They marked the line between freedom and confinement, between the noise of the city and the muted silence of veiled corridors. They protected and imprisoned, granting status and taking it away in the same breath. The harem was more than a space, it was an idea, a symbol of the Sultan's absolute authority and of the mysteries that could never be spoken beyond its gates. Inside the harem, silence was not absence, it was presence. It lingered in the courtyards, where the trickle of fountains echoed softly against marble. It floated through the long corridors, broken only by the shuffle of slippers on polished floors. To live within those walls was to learn the language of quiet gestures, a glance, a bowed head, the faint rustle of silk. Words were rare, and when they came, they carried weight. Life unfolded in rhythms that blurred the passing of days. Dawn revealed itself not with the cries of merchants, but with the muted steps of attendants drawing back curtains, letting in only a measured glow of light. Midday was marked by ritual, lessons in music, poetry or etiquette, overseen by women who had once been chosen themselves and now passed their knowledge to the next generation. Evening came with subdued gatherings, where the air carried scents of rosewater and jasmine, and the sound of distant prayers drifted faintly from the city beyond the walls. For the women within, the silence was both comfort and cage. It shielded them from the noise and danger of the outside world, yet it also severed them from it. Some found peace in the order, the rituals, the rare luxuries. Others felt the weight of confinement press heavily, their dreams of freedom slowly dissolving into the routine of the harem. The high walls that promised protection also whispered of boundaries never to be crossed. The eunuchs who guarded the halls reinforced this atmosphere. Their presence was quiet, watchful, unyielding. They moved like shadows, ensuring that the delicate balance of order remained unbroken. To those who lived there, their silence carried as much authority as the Sultan's commands. Every step, every decision, every glance seemed to remind the women that their lives unfolded under constant watch. And yet, within this silence, power stirred. It was not always spoken, but it was felt in who received the Sultan's glance, in whose chambers were visited, in whose name was whispered more often than another. The harem was not only a sanctuary, it was a theatre where the stakes were invisible yet immense, and all of it was wrapped in the stillness of those walls, where secrets echoed louder than voices ever could. The ritual of selection. The harem was not filled by chance. Every woman within those walls had been chosen, her presence the result of a ritual that blended beauty, politics, and destiny. The process began far beyond the palace itself, in markets, villages, and distant provinces where scouts and envoys carried the Sultan's gaze into the world. They sought not only physical beauty, though that was prized above all, but qualities less visible, grace in movement, wit in speech, or the spark of intelligence that could one day shape intrigue. Some women entered through gifts, offerings from governors or foreign rulers eager to secure the Sultan's favor. Others were taken as tribute, symbols of submission from conquered lands. There were those who entered by fortune and those who entered by tragedy, plucked from their families and carried into a world they could never have imagined. To arrive at the gates of the harem was to step across an invisible threshold, leaving behind one life for another that would never end in the same way. Upon entering, the women were not immediately transformed into companions of the Sultan. They began instead as novices, living in dormitories under the strict guidance of elder women. Here, they learned the arts expected of them, how to walk with elegance, how to speak with refinement, how to dance, how to sing, and how to master the delicate crafts of poetry and conversation. Each lesson was designed not only to please the Sultan, but to prepare them for survival in an environment where beauty alone was never enough. The training was rigorous and its silence heavy. A misplaced word, a clumsy gesture, even a moment of hesitation could determine whether a girl rose to prominence or faded into obscurity. The harem, for all its perfumes and silks, was a place of unspoken tests. To succeed was to ascend toward the Sultan's notice, and perhaps toward influence that extended far beyond the harem's walls. To fail was to remain in the shadows, one among many, forgotten in the endless rhythm of life behind the veils. As the women advanced through their training, the delicate hierarchy of the harem revealed itself. At the top stood the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, whose authority often extended even beyond the walls of the harem into the empire itself. Below her were the senior concubines, those who had already gained the Sultan's attention and bore the title of favorites. Beneath them moved the novices, still learning, still hoping for the moment when a glance or a gesture might change their lives forever. The moment of selection was both feared and desired. When the Sultan chose to visit the harem, silence fell like a veil over the chambers. Women stood poised, their faces serene though their hearts raced. A lowered gaze, a soft smile, the careful tilt of a head. Every gesture was a language, every movement a plea, for to be chosen was to step into light, but also into peril. Favor could bring wealth, jewels, influence, even children destined for power, but it could also invite jealousy, rivalry, and the sharp sting of intrigue. Older women, the keepers of discipline, guided this process with sharp eyes. They corrected gestures, trained voices, and whispered warnings to those who faltered. They were not merely teachers, but gatekeepers, shaping which women might one day ascend and which would remain shadows in the corridors. Their words carried weight, for they knew that survival in the harem demanded more than beauty. It demanded cunning, restraint, and the ability to move within a world where affection and ambition were indistinguishable. In this way, the ritual of selection was less a single moment than a continuous test. Every step, every glance, every word was part of an unending audition before unseen judges. The Sultan's gaze might fall on one woman tonight and pass over her tomorrow. The promise of favor lingered in the air like perfume, intoxicating and dangerous, shaping the lives of all who dwelled within the walls of silence. Power behind veils. To the world outside, the harem was imagined only as a sanctuary of beauty and desire. But within its veiled corridors, another reality unfolded, a place where politics moved as silently as shadows, and where power often wore the face of a woman. Behind silken curtains, destinies were shaped, not only for individuals, but for the empire itself. The favorites of the Sultan held a place unlike any other. Their proximity to the ruler was not simply a privilege of intimacy, it was a form of influence more subtle, yet more dangerous than the decrees of viziers or the commands of generals. A whispered suggestion in the quiet of night could steer the Sultan's attention toward a province, a law, or a rival at court. A glance or a sigh could decide which voice he trusted, which petition he favored, which man rose or fell in fortune. But with influence came peril. Within the harem, rivalry ran deep, for every woman knew that favor was fleeting. Today's favorite could be tomorrow's forgotten shadow. Some forged alliances, gathering allies among eunuchs, servants, or fellow concubines. Others relied on charm alone, their smiles concealing daggers of ambition. It was said that more than one decision of empire was born not in the council chamber, but in the intimate chambers of the Sultan's harem. The Validate Sultan, the Sultan's mother, presided above all. She was the true power behind the veils, guiding the women, protecting her son's throne, and often outmaneuvering even the most skilled viziers. Her authority was unquestioned within the harem, and her influence stretched beyond it, shaping marriages, alliances, and even wars. To oppose her was to court ruin. To win her favor was to open a path toward unimagined heights. The harem, then, was not merely a private world of silk and song. It was a stage where power moved quietly, invisibly, yet decisively. Every smile, every word, every silence could ripple outward, shaping the fate of a dynasty. Within the harem, rivalry was as constant as the rising sun. Beneath the calm surface of soft music and measured ritual, the women moved like players upon a silent stage, each seeking her place in a hierarchy where favor was fleeting and ambition unending. A smile could conceal jealousy, a gesture of kindness might mask a calculated move. Concubines whispered in secluded alcoves, weaving fragile alliances that might last a week, a month, or until the Sultan's gaze shifted again. Some cultivated friendships with eunuchs, those silent guardians who carried messages and guarded secrets. Others offered gifts or flattery to the Valid Sultan, hoping her approval would shield them from rivals. In this hidden world, influence was never earned openly, but through subtleties. A rumor dropped at the right moment, a suggestion placed in the ear of a servant, a glance interpreted by the watchful eyes of power. But ambition was dangerous. When two women rose too high, conflict became inevitable. Whispers grew into accusations, accusations into punishments that echoed through the corridors. Sometimes the consequences were quiet, a woman suddenly sent away to a distant palace, her name never spoken again. At other times, the consequences were more visible, silken veils drawn tighter, heads lowered in shame, lives altered by a single misstep in the intricate dance of favor. Yet in this constant struggle, the harem revealed its true nature. It was not simply a place of pleasure, but a crucible where the will of the empire itself was tested. Every choice, every rivalry, every alliance carried echoes beyond the veils. Ministers might present laws, generals might march armies, but in the shadows of the harem, destinies were bent in silence. And so the women, though hidden from the eyes of the world, became invisible architects of history. Their power wore no crown, carried no sword, yet it shaped the empire as surely as the Sultan himself. Shadows of politics. If the women of the harem moved with whispers, the eunuchs moved with silence. They were its unseen spine, ever present, ever watchful, guiding the flow of life within the veiled chambers. To the outside world, they seemed mere servants, guardians of a hidden order. But within those walls, they were more than watchmen. They were the mediators of secrets, the carriers of messages, the keepers of balance in a world where every glance carried weight. Chosen from boyhood and reshaped by cruel necessity, the eunuchs lived lives entirely bound to the palace. Their loyalty was cultivated through isolation. They had no family beyond the harem, no ties beyond their duties. To the women, they were both protectors and barriers, the gatekeepers who determined which words reached the Sultan and which were lost in silence. A whispered petition might die in their hands, or it might be carried directly into the Sultan's chamber. The chief among them, the Kislar Aga, wielded power equal to that of viziers. His shadow extended from the inner quarters to the highest councils of empire, for he alone commanded the passage of information between the Sultan and the harem. His voice could ruin a rival, elevate a concubine, or decide the outcome of a conspiracy before it had begun. Every step he took was measured, every word chosen with care. And yet behind his quiet authority, the eunuchs were also instruments of surveillance. They listened at doors, observed in silence, and carried fragments of gossip that could blossom into storms. Many a plot withered, not because it was discovered in the streets, but because it was betrayed in the soft lamplight of the harem, overheard by ears trained to detect disloyalty. The harem, imagined by many as a sanctuary of pleasure, was in truth a web of politics, and the eunuchs were the spiders at its center, weaving threads that bound women, viziers, and even the Sultan himself into a fabric of secrets. Within the labyrinth of the harem, intrigue grew like ivy, clinging to every corridor, every whispered word. Behind the stillness of veils and silks, conspiracies were born, not always with daggers or poison, but with rumors that spread like smoke through marble halls. Here, politics was not argued in councils or proclaimed in public squares. It was woven quietly in chambers scented with rosewater and guarded by silence. Some concubines, ambitious and clever, learned to use gossip as their sharpest weapon. A single suggestion, whispered to a eunuch or murmured in the ear of a rival, could tip the balance of favor. A woman whose name once lingered sweetly on the Sultan's lips might overnight find herself disgraced, accused of treachery, or sent away under the shadow of scandal. In the harem, reputation was more fragile than glass, and envy struck harder than steel. But the intrigues did not remain confined within its walls. The harem connected to the empire beyond, like hidden veins feeding into the heart of power. Eunuchs, acting as intermediaries, carried secret messages to viziers and courtiers. Decisions about wars, alliances, or executions could be influenced not in the council hall, but through the whispered requests of a favored concubine. The empire itself often bent under the weight of voices spoken in secrecy. At times, the harem became a battlefield of factions. One group of women aligned with a powerful vizier, while another gathered around the valid sultan. What began as rivalries over affection transformed into struggles over policy, with the fate of provinces or generals determined by unseen hands. The Palace of Desire became, in truth, a palace of politics, where ambition wore silk and conspiracies moved in the rustle of curtains. And always, the Sultan remained at the center. He listened, sometimes amused, sometimes wary, knowing that behind the smiles and careful words of his companions lay strategies as dangerous as any forged by his enemies on the battlefield. For the harem, though hidden from the eyes of the city, was no less a stage of power than the throne itself. Decay and danger. In time, the harem, once imagined as a sanctuary of beauty and order, became a mirror of excess. What had begun as a carefully balanced world of discipline and ritual slowly gave way to indulgence, scandals, and the weight of too much power behind closed doors. The very walls that had concealed its mysteries now seemed to whisper of corruption. Whispers of forbidden encounters spread through the palace. Some spoke of concubines who defied the rules, slipping into secret romances with guards or servants. Others told of eunuchs who, entrusted with silence, became traders of secrets, selling their knowledge to those willing to pay in gold or favor. Though many of these tales were exaggerated by outsiders, they carried a dangerous truth. The harem, once tightly controlled, was no longer unshakable. Rebellions brewed not only outside the empire but within the palace itself. Novices, tired of confinement, sometimes resisted their training. Concubines plotted against rivals with increasing boldness, and even the valid sultan struggled at times to maintain her authority over restless factions. Where once the order of silence had reigned, there now lingered the uneasy murmur of discontent. For the Sultan, the harem became both treasure and burden. His pleasures were satisfied within its chambers, yet his fears also grew there. He could no longer be certain whom to trust. Every smile, every gesture, every act of obedience might conceal betrayal. The harem that had once been his symbol of control threatened instead to become the source of his downfall. And outside, the people of the city whispered with sharper tongues. Bread grew scarce, wars demanded soldiers, and taxes weighed heavily on the poor. Yet they imagined the harem filled with fountains of wine, feasts of rare fruits, and nights of endless indulgence. Whether true or not, perception itself was enough to turn admiration into resentment. The harem, so long a symbol of power, began to be seen as the emblem of decadence. Its walls no longer promised mystery, but danger. As rumors of corruption grew louder, the harem itself became a tool in the hands of the Sultan's enemies. Viziers who sought to weaken his rule spoke of wasted treasures, of women elevated above warriors, of decisions whispered in candlelit chambers instead of council halls. Whether true or exaggerated, the image of a ruler consumed by his harem became a weapon more dangerous than any army. Foreign ambassadors carried these stories back to their courts, painting the Sultan not as a mighty sovereign but as a man imprisoned by desire. The harem became a symbol not of strength but of weakness, a metaphor for an empire distracted, vulnerable, and sinking into its own indulgence. What had once been the hidden heart of power now stood accused of being the very cause of decay. Even among the Sultan's own ranks, doubt spread. Soldiers in distant garrisons grumbled that they spilled blood for an emperor who spent his nights among silks and perfumes. Officials lamented that laws were bent not by justice but by whispers behind veils. The resentment of the city, the gossip of the court, and the scorn of foreign lands all converged to form a shadow that grew heavier than the stone walls of the palace itself. Inside the harem, fear thickened. Concubines who had once plotted only for favor now feared for survival, for a sultan's fall often dragged down those closest to him. Eunuchs, once silent and steady, whispered more nervously, their eyes darting toward doors and shadows. Even the valid sultan's authority trembled, for power built on secrecy was now undone by exposure. Thus the harem, once the guarded jewel of the empire, became its most fragile weakness. It reflected the Sultan's indulgence, magnified his enemies' accusations, and reminded all who looked upon it that no wall, however high, could contain the weight of discontent forever. Legacy of the Forbidden. Long after the voices within the harem had faded, its image remained alive in memory. Travelers wrote of it with fascination, their words painting visions more imagined than true. Poets sang of silken veils and hidden pleasures, while chroniclers recorded whispers of intrigues that had once reached from the Sultan's bedchamber to the furthest provinces of the empire. The harem, once a guarded space of silence, became a legend retold across continents. For some, it was remembered as a paradise of desire, a world where beauty reigned above all else. For others, it became a cautionary tale of decadence, the very emblem of a ruler's weakness. Foreign powers, unable to pierce its walls, filled the gaps with fantasy, exaggerating its secrets until the harem itself grew larger in myth than in reality. And yet within the empire, its legacy was more complex. Many knew that the harem had been not only a stage of pleasure, but also of politics, a place where decisions had been forged in whispers, where the valid sultan had steered the fate of dynasties, and where women once hidden from the world had shaped the course of history. The harem was both myth and truth, both scandal and strategy. The walls still stood, but their silence had changed. No longer a sanctuary of secrets, they had become monuments to memory. The golden nights and the whispered conspiracies lived on, not in the marble, but in the stories that time refused to let die. The memory of the harem did not vanish with the passing of empires. Instead, it lingered like a shadow, reshaped by every generation that spoke of it. To some, it remained an exotic fantasy, the dream of silks, perfumes, and endless pleasures hidden behind golden gates. To others, it was remembered as a warning, a space where desire blurred into corruption, and where the heart of power grew fragile under the weight of indulgence. Historians, centuries later, struggled to separate truth from invention. They found fragments, letters, records, glimpses through the eyes of travelers, yet each piece was distorted by rumor or longing. Was the harem truly a paradise of beauty, or a prison gilded in gold? Was it a stage for passion, or a chamber of politics more cunning than the council of viziers? In the end, it was both and more, a world where secrecy itself became the greatest weapon. What endured most was its symbolism. The harem became a mirror in which empires, rulers, and even ordinary people saw their own fears and desires reflected. It embodied the tension between hidden and revealed, between intimacy and power, between silence and influence. Its stories were retold not because they were exact, but because they resonated with timeless truths, that behind every throne lies a chamber unseen, and that power is always most dangerous when it hides itself behind curtains. And so the Sultan's forbidden harem lived on, not as a place, but as a legend of veils and shadows, of whispers and rivalries, of beauty entwined with danger. Long after the marble cracked and the silks rotted into dust, its legacy remained, the eternal reminder that what happens behind closed walls can shape the fate of nations, and that the greatest secrets of power are often those never spoken aloud.